Afternoon. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat. And this is the show that's trying to make the world safe for ADHD. I am a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist. I am in private practice, and at least half of my time is ADHD, sometimes more, sometimes a little less. And it's been that way most of my career. In my area, I'm the man for ADHD anyway. And I spend an awful lot of time telling people, or doing therapy with people about how to cope with the poor working memory and how to cope with the inattention, impulsivity, poor attention, all that stuff. I spend a lot of time with that. But just every once in a while, I think it's a good idea to kind of step back and look at the good things that are associated with ADHD. And indeed, there are some, okay? Your ADHD child is never going to be a neurotypical kid. And the more your expectations are that they be neurotypical, that they be neat and orderly and do things in a linear, logical way and on and on and on, are compliant and so on, you might as well forget that. That is never going to happen, okay? But there are some good things about ADHD. And some of you out there are married to ADHD people. So just think, out of all the people in the world you could have married, established a relationship, that sort of thing, you pick somebody with ADHD. Why do you suppose that was? Well, I'm going to go over a little, kind of a quickie sort of list of this. And there are some things about ADHD. In the right pocket, life is great. Okay, one, ADHDers are energetic. No surprise there. If you've watched your 5-year-old go screaming around the house for, the whole rainy day, they've got a lot of energy. They also tend to be spontaneous. Okay, they think outside the box. They're not the compliant, in the box kind of people that basically our schools are designed for. Our schools, we've got to admit, are designed to develop cubicle dwellers. Okay, that's a problem, I think. I think it's a serious problem, but that's the way it is. I mean, in the area I live in, you get more credit for being compliant than you do for being brilliant. Do stuff when you're told to do stuff, turn it in when you're supposed to turn it in. You're an A+ student, but you've never had to display the capacity for any original thought in your whole life. Okay, energetic, I already said. Spontaneous is another one. A lot of times I think people marry ADHDers because they're kind of fun to be around. They've always got an idea. Hey, let's do this. Hey, let's do that. That's one of the things that attracts people, I think. And that's one of those things that that you're going to have to deal with if you actually end up marrying them. Because life will be interesting. It'll be fast-moving. But it'll never be neat and orderly and well-organized. Just isn't going to happen. Creativity. What's one of my favorites? ADHDers tend, on average, to be very creative. They love weird, abstract problems. They love to come up with a new way of doing things. And they have this perspective. They look at things a little differently. And sometimes that helps them make the big call, the big way to solve the problem. It is a partly it's because their brains work a little differently. They see things a little differently. I didn't mention this at the start, but I have a child that's got, well, he's an adult now, that's got ADHD. And he was forever surprising me with questions he had, the ways he looked at stuff, the way he just looked at things. Dad, I remember one was particularly, your toenails are smaller than your fingernails mostly, right? I said, yeah. Well, how come toenail clippers are bigger than fingernail clippers? Just stuff I'd never thought about. Okay, creativity. There's been a lot in the media and so on about hyperfocus. And not every ADHDer has hyperfocus. And not everyone who has hyperfocus can use it profitably. But the idea with hyperfocus is that ADHDers, their interest-based attention span, what they like, they really like. What they don't like, you have to beat them with a stick to try to get them to do anything in it. But they tend to, if it's something they like, they tend to be able to hyper-focus and work at something for hours. Stay up late at night, all night, that sort of thing, to get the problem solved, to get the thing done, whatever it is. And that's hyper-focus. And a cool idea that's it's just in the literature, but to my knowledge, has not been researched. But the idea that if you were an ADHDer and you could figure out what it takes to get you into hyperfocus, like do you have to do something special? Do you have to be thinking something special? Do you have to be feeling a certain way? Something, because if you can figure that out, then you can control it. And then, woo, Katie barred the door. There will be all sorts of wonderful things you can do based on that. Because you'd have so much control, so much more control than you're used to having. It would be a really neat change in your life. Okay, and we haven't mentioned it yet. ADHDers tend on the whole to be funny, humorous. They have a great sense of humor typically. Partly, I think it's just because they look at the world a little differently. And when you think about it, most humor is based on a little tweak in levels of abstraction. When you look at a situation, if you get wrapped up and are in the same situation as the person telling it, you won't say anything really humorous. But if you're outside looking at it from a different perspective, you can frequently make humorous comments, and they tend to do that. ADHDers tend to be generous. They tend to be the folks who help people out, who share their sandwich, who, even share their candy. They tend to do that, and because they're not very good at doing things exactly the way the bulk of society does, they tend to look for ingenious solutions. They tend to do things differently. I've talked before about how they tend to be horizontal or lateral organizers. That is, they tend to put stuff on piles. On any flat surface in the room, there'll be a pile. And typically they know what's in that pile. But if you put that pile away, put everything neatly in a file cabinet or something, it disappears for them. That's part of the negative side of a working memory problem, but it is fascinating to see some of the things they come up with. And organization systems. Most of us neurotypical folks were taught alphabetize numerals, number. So A1, B2, C3, and so on. That doesn't work for a lot of ADHDers. They don't work that way. Their brains don't work that way. They don't think that way. So sometimes they do things like use different colors to indicate different areas, red is math, green is science, who knows. But they use color to organize in ways that, frankly, I don't totally understand, but I have seen it, and I am, frankly, fascinated by the different ways they go about organizing things. And ADHDers also have a sense of fairness, a sense of compassion. Maybe it's because they spend so much time, getting into trouble for minor things. There are compliance-based school system. I don't know, but they tend to be really sensitive to things that aren't fair, that aren't they think are unnecessarily punitive, and I think partly it's just the way what they have to put up with when they're growing up, and that by itself makes them more sensitive to other people, being unfairly taken advantage of for one thing or another. They're also, as anybody who has raised an ADHD child knows, they're risk takers. Okay, the bad side of that is when they're on the roof of the garage jumping into the pile of leaves. The good side of that is when they're in business, they're entrepreneurs, and they're deciding to take this next risk and add this new service or whatever. They're way more likely to take the risk. And sometimes that's wonderful, and sometimes it's not so good, but they are more likely to take a risk than a compliance-based, neurotypical person. And strangely enough, although we watch them kind of have troubles getting started, having troubles finishing what they start and all that stuff, they tend to be persistent. They tend to keep going until they eventually get it done. Maybe not as fast as one would like, but they do get it done. And there are other things, other characteristics, but we could go on and on and on. But one of the things we find as we look at lists of famous people who have ADHD, we find there are a disproportionate number of athletes, of actors and musicians and that sort of thing, and entrepreneurs, business people who own their own businesses and that sort of thing. And I am constantly thrilled and excited by that. I think entrepreneurial business practices are what's going to save this economy from all these people that are currently running things, the 1% we keep reading about in the news. Your entrepreneur changes things. Your entrepreneur, by definition, is going to do things differently. There's just no way that they're going to do things the same way everybody else has done. And they're uniquely qualified for that. Their unique kind of way of looking at things, their creativity, their willingness to take risks. That's the good stuff, and we need to encourage that. We need to recognize that in our children if we are the parents of ADHDers, and frankly in our partners if we married into the ADHD fold. It's going to be an exciting run, I guarantee you that. It won't be boring. But if you're a partner of a person with ADHD, try to remember why you got into this in the first place. Try to remember the things that attracted you in the first place. That'll help, I promise. Okay. I also want to put a shout out to the parents of ADHD kids. because I read a lot of literature and stuff, and some of you all come up with novel solutions to your ADHDers' difficulties, and that is a great thing. That is one of the things we want our parents to be able to do if we're in the therapy business. First of all, you got to pay attention to your kid to know what you're going to do differently, and then you got to come up with what works for them. You need to be a little bit familiar with what's been tried before, but you also need to be looking closely to see how they naturally do things. That tells you what you can change in the environment to get them to have a morning routine, get to school on time, bring everything they need home from school. All those different little responsibilities and things. There are all sorts of systems. Most of them are based on linear logical thinking, which means they might not appeal to your ADHDer. Okay, so you've got to figure out how to make it interesting for them. And that sometimes is tricky, but I have read about, I have talked with parents who've come up with some really novel solutions to, just the basic getting out the door with all the stuff you need kind of problem. And getting them to like doing homework and on and on. So I salute you for your patience, persistence, keen powers of observation, and willingness to try a creative solution. That's what makes ADHDers kind of fun to be around, and it makes them a community. Just one last thing. I am interested in internet marketing. Don't know exactly why, but I minored in marketing, I guess I could say, when I was in undergraduate school. And then something happened, and here I am. But I have always been interested in how, with just a computer, an iPhone, or any kind of a cell phone, I guess, just those two things, you can control the media as well as a old-fashioned advertising agency used to be able to do with millions of dollars to spend. You think about it. Newspapers, who cares? You've got a blog, the daily news, you've got Facebook Live, YouTube. There are so many ways to get your message out. So I go to a lot of conferences that teach things like internet marketing, how to do videos, how to organize a marketing campaign, things like that. Meet a lot of entrepreneurs. I have never made it through a whole conference without having about 20 to 30 people around me asking questions about ADHD. Because they've all got it. At least 70% of the people who define themselves as entrepreneurs have ADHD or ADHD characteristics, or a family that's so loaded with ADHD that they've got to be borderline. So it doesn't kill anybody. It is one of those things that, you can make it a benefit or you can make it a big pain, but you're probably better off making it a benefit, and that comes at least partly from concentrating on the positive aspects. Okay? I think we have a tendency to get so worried about school that we don't take the time out to appreciate what we've got in our ADHD children. So that's me for this week. I am, as always, Dr. Terry James Gingras. This is Dr. G's ADHD Chat, and we're here to try to make the world safe for ADHDers. Because remember, the big problems in the world are solved by people who think outside the box. And that's your child. So cherish it. or her. Okay, I have a website, terrygingrassphd.com. And if you need to get in touch with me or something, there's somewhere around here you can drop me a line, including things you'd like to see me talk about a little bit. I've been doing this a long time. I started out when we knew virtually nothing about ADHD, and I'm pleased to say that that has changed. But ask away, okay? And we will catch you next time.